Hi, my name is Pat Farenga. I'm the president of JohnHoltGWS.com, and I published Growing Without Schooling magazine. The magazine was founded by the late John Holt in 1977, and when John passed away in 1985, I took over as president and publisher and continued publishing until 2001. So I've been involved in the alternative education movement at least since 1981, but specifically in the homeschooling and unschooling movement. John Holt coined the term unschooling, by which he meant learning that doesn't look like school learning and doesn't have to take place in a home or a classroom, but out in the real world. I'd like to thank Özlem Arkun'a and the Alternative Education Sempozyum for inviting me to address you in Istanbul via video link. Actually, this is pre-recorded, but you understand what I'm trying to say here. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. Even though you're in a whole other continent, we share so many things, particularly around education. Now, one of the first questions I was asked by Özlem was, what is education? Well, most people would say, education is what happens in school. It's almost a foolish question to ask nowadays. But people forget, way back when, let's say 1968, when the student protests were in full swing, a very popular saying was, schooling is not the same as education. Because many people, particularly young college graduates and undergraduates, were realizing that schooling wasn't really preparing them for what was going on in life. But by the 1970s, John Holt realized that education had just become a certification process, a way of separating the good students from the bad students and those who deserve high-paying jobs to those who deserve menial jobs. And they deserve it based solely on their school performance, because if they don't improve in school, there's no chance for them to improve afterwards, and they're just destined to be these low earners. And then of course we have standardized tests that reinforce all this, because as John Holt was saying back in the 70s, and many critics in the 80s and 90s of standardized tests, they just showed that the wealthier you are, the better you test, because your overall education, everything around you helps you get smarter. Not just cramming for the test, but also those students could pay to get tutored and cram for tests. It always amazes me how everyone thinks that education at its root comes from the word educare, to draw forth. So therefore, I, as a teacher, my job is to draw forth. The school is to draw forth the talents that are inert inside every student. They must somehow energize them and then make them grasp math, grasp the principles of biology and physics and so on. But Illich, my friend and mentor, Ivan Illich, wrote a lot about education. His book, Deschooling Society, is still really worth reading. It's a short tome, but very dense. And Illich pointed out to me, and he wrote about this in one of his books too, that the root word, the Latin root, educare, where we get the word education from, educate, actually means to draw forth, but not the teacher drawing forth from the pupil. What it refers to is nursing, suckling. It refers to a child drawing forth mother's milk. And that's why in the early iconography of the Catholic Church, in statues, and also probably in other religions, I've noted this in some other places, men are presented as having breasts. And the breasts represent the milk of knowledge, that you are to come and learn from them, But this is a completely different attitude, than I'm going to do something to you to make you smart, as opposed to, I'm hungry, I'm curious, I'm tired, I'm interested, I want to do something. You're the agent. You're drawing forth. And a lot of people immediately say, well, children, if they're given the choice to just draw forth whatever they want, will always just choose to play or be mean or sullen. And I think that that's a complete misreading of what children are like. You know, it's one of those things that we don't know anymore because we don't have children around us a lot. And when we do, they're always in school situations where they're being controlled, where their behavior is being controlled and predicted. And they know it, they sense it. And so, of course, even the smart students sometimes want to get away with something because enough of this control. Right? At some point, you rebel, even if it's a minor thing. But, you know, school does this a lot. And certainly in a home situation, you know, really rigorous parents who are, you know, what would I say, not overachievers, but who are really hard on themselves and on their kids, right? I mean, there's a lot of examples in history and culture of these sorts of people, but also of people learning through the flow of life. Learning how to become a doctor through apprentice, learning to become a lawyer through apprentice, just as people learn to be stonemasons and tapestry weavers and horse breeders and gardeners and farmers and ranchers. They learn by being around other people, by growing up in that environment or in that community and realizing, yeah, that's not bad, I could do that. You know, they learn through mimesis, as Aristotle would say, by imitation. Like children will ask deep questions. Children will not want to play all the time. They will want to do stuff. And by the way, just because they're playing doesn't mean they're not learning. Play is the work of children. And this is really important to also realize. Education, when we define it as only what happens in school, completely forgets that children, from the minute they're born, are learning. John Holt's last book was called Learning All the Time, and the subtitle is How Young Children Learn to Read, Write, and Calculate Without Being Taught. And the book is full of great examples of that. But also, we know this. Children learn to walk, talk, and socialize for centuries. But now, all of a sudden, we think we have to buy books and manuals to teach our children not only how to walk and talk properly, but also how to use computers, something that they would learn through imitation very quickly. And, by the way, they always have. You know, I mean, there are a lot of kids who are right on top of computers in the 80s, well before they were being taught in colleges, except at like the higher levels of college or specialized colleges. It wasn't a general course like it is now. So we really should be working with people's and children's inner drives, which we all have. Some are more prominent and obvious, but, you know, we all have it. But to hedge our bets, we put them in school and say, X, Y, Z, learn this, as if there's a biological marker that everyone needs to learn to read by the time they're in third grade in America. But there is no biological marker. Some kids learn to read even before they go to school. Other children, they don't learn to read until later. But we just made this arbitrary marker. You know, why? You know, in fact, Neil Postman, in his book The End of Education, noted that, you know, it was the school masters who pretty much created the concept of child development by saying that as a child gets older, they should learn X, Y, and Z, so they're developing into adults. Education is not the same as schooling, and schooling is not the same as learning. This is where alternative educators, homeschoolers, this is where we all come together. We're focused on learning. We're focused on the process of learning and how unique and individual that is. You know, again, at some point you will choose, maybe, you may never have to, but most people probably will choose to take a class at some point in their life, certainly more than one. What should the relationship be between teacher and learner? Well, we know for centuries it's always been master-pupil. That's it, right? Master-pupil. Sit down, shut up, and do as I say. Imitate me. Do this. no, you're doing it wrong. That's pretty much what instruction has meant for centuries. But we know that we don't only learn that way. In fact, some people get pissed off, get upset when they're taught without, unnecessarily. It would be rude for an adult to say, "Oh no, Mr. Farenga, that's not how you pronounce the word." But we think nothing of stopping a complete strange child in mid-sentence and say, "Oh no, that's not how you say it," right? So, there's this lack of respect. And of course, when one's a master and one's a pupil, we know who to respect and who not. So I think what we have to do is get this teacher-learner balance back. And alternative educators and homeschoolers, I include in that all the time. What they are doing is making sure that not only is the child going to be in an environment where they can feel free to learn, but also that the teacher is receptive to the child and their particular circumstances. If they will know something, alternative schools and homeschools, of course, have much smaller student-teacher ratios. So you're able to do that. You're able to know that if someone's having a difficult time at home, take it easy on them. Maybe let's not do some certain lessons or certain things today. Let's instead go for a walk. Let's do something, or let the kids play. But we can't do that, when you've got a principal and an assistant principal and a superintendent and a district supervisor and a regional supervisor all looking down each other's shoulders to the poor teacher in the classroom. And that teacher has now become just their handmaiden, their servant, executing their orders. It's like, teaching has become a very dissatisfying job for many people as a result of all the political and corporate interests that make teachers follow certain techniques and textbooks and curricula. So alternative educators have often used real life primary primary materials, right? We go to the library, we get the book that we want to read. We don't read a summary of the book in the class. If we want to go and investigate local history or a history lesson, we take a field trip. Or we talk to someone who's familiar with it. Maybe we have a grandparent or a relative or some who could tell us about the history of where I live, is Medford, Massachusetts, or the history of certain places in Istanbul. I mean, these are the ways we've always learned this, and learned this way. And this is one of those great things, is that in alternative education, the relationship between teacher and learner typically is more friendly and more human connected rather than control and predict. And I say this particularly for unschoolers, one of the most important things is to learn to graciously take no from your child. Most parents have a real hard time when their child says no. It's rude, it's impertinent, it's disrespectful. But what if they're expressing an honest feeling? Why knock that? Do you want to learn some math today? No. What's the harm? You can learn it a week from now, or better yet, you can learn it when you go to the store. They won't even know it's math. Here, make change of this $1. How do I do that? I'll show you. I know a lot of kids who've learned math over the decades because their parents sat down with them and showed them how to keep the checkbook balanced for the family. They would, particularly in rural areas where they would, work on farms and have animals. Sometimes the children would be given because they wanted to, not because the parents were assigning it, but the child wanted to take care of a particular animal, and that became their animal to care for. And they rise to the occasion. This is, earlier I said that, most people think that children, if left alone to make their own choices, would do nothing but eat candy and play games all day. But we know that's not true, They may do that the first couple of days, but they're going to get bored with that. And, I doubt they'd even do it that long. They want to do things that we do. They want to imitate us. I mean, this is one of the great things about children and play that we've lost because we think play is frivolous. It's not educational. But fortunately, there are people like Dr. Peter Gray and educators like John Holt and Paul Goodman who always saw that children's free time in their play is often more educational than a formal lesson. John, in his most popular book, is How Children Learn. In 2017, it celebrated its 50th year in print. And in How Children Learn, John makes the point that children are really good at learning if we give them the chance and we have the patience. We can give children freedom. It's also, what's our patience with that freedom? How much patience do we have? And we need a lot of patience. We don't learn on this schedule that schools have. So again, there's no biological marker, but it's just like this education marker. The system has decided you must learn to read because the system won't operate well unless you can read these books moving forward. The time it used to be in kindergarten where they say, that was the end of play and then boom, the real job began in first grade. But now even kindergarten is becoming very structured. And there's even a call for mandatory preschool so children are properly prepared to be kindergartners. It's like we're changing our entire mode of teaching and learning to fit in the system rather than making the system fit us. And particularly today, with all the technology that's available and how everyone is bragging about this technology is going to make life more customized and better for us. What we're actually seeing is it's being used to simply standardize kids and standardize stuff in school. It hasn't really broken open instruction because the same people who are writing the computer programs are the people that wrote the curriculum in the first place. So we're just baking in all those assumptions about children and learning right into those algorithms. Adults all the time, kids need to socialize among themselves. And that's, again, the value of play. John Holt, when he wrote How Children Learn, he wrote it in 1967. And as I said, it's been in print ever since. But before he passed away, in 1983, he revised it. And of all his books, that had the greatest number of revisions. Because based on his work with homeschoolers from 1977 to 1985, well, 83 when he was writing the book, John noted that one thing that he didn't see clearly when he was a teacher was that children use play not just to get as fantasy, as a way to escape, but as a way to get into the world, to understand it. Children aren't pretending to be firemen just for the sake of it. They're doing it because they want to know what it's like to be a fireman. What's it like to be a criminal? What's it like to be a cop? Let's play cops and robbers. Here's a real common one for homeschoolers and unschoolers. My kids, when they got together with other homeschoolers and unschoolers, there was a period where they would play school. They would either act as teachers and teach the dolls in front of them, or one of them would be the teacher and the other kids would pretend to be students. They're trying to figure out the world. And so let me end with this story. After John Holt died and I became president of Holt Associates, one of the first articles I wrote that got published about homeschooling started with this quote by William Butler Yeats. "Education is not the filling of a bucket, but the lighting of a fire." And John Holt, unknown to me at the time, had actually criticized that concept. And it was my friend Aaron Falbell, who also was friends with John Holt in Yvonne Illich, very good friends with Illich. Falbell, Aaron, took me aside and said, not a bad article, Pat, but I'm not so sure about that quote. I don't think John would have used that. And I'm like, what do you mean? I thought that was a fine quote. And he said, well, children are born with the fire lit. They're learning all the time. Education's job is not to put the fire out. And that hit me. That makes sense. Our job as teachers, as parents, is not to quash our children's intellectual curiosity, not to dispirit them about their abilities, but to make them feel confident that the world is an interesting place and worthy of exploring. We don't want them to be unsafe, and that's our job. You know, we make sure that things are safe for them, but they're the ones doing the exploring. And we have to let them go out because that's their fire. Let's kindle that fire. Let's not extinguish it. Thank you.